Hey everybody, and welcome back to the MCE Offroad Garage. Today we'll be installing our Stage 6 stereo kit for the Can-Am Defender.
Alright, so let's get into it here. For our Stage 6 kits, for the main components, you're going to have your Rockford Fosgate PMX2 for your head unit, Rockford Fosgate M5 15x5 amp. You'll have 6 of the Kicker 6.5 marine speakers with the LED lights inside of them. You'll have your Kicker 10-inch subwoofer that will get installed. You will also get an antenna if you wanted to listen to your FM radio. You have your antenna. Here you'll have your Wet Sounds RGB controller for your speaker LEDs. Along with that, we also give you all the wiring that you need for this kit. So you'll have your amplifier wiring and fuse, you have your speaker wiring, your subwoofer wiring, wires to go from your head unit to the amp, all of your LED speaker wires. Our kit also utilizes the C-Works speaker mounts that mount up inside of the headliner for a nice clean OEM look. This would also come with, all your zip ties, things to kind of clean it up, make it look nice, hold it in place, along with our full paper installation instructions as well, if you wanted to follow along with those instead. All of our wiring that comes with the kits will all the ends will be labeled like all of our other kits that we get. Our tail light kits or reverse light kits, they're all labeled the same way. All these labels are on there just so that way you can tell where they're supposed to go when you're done installing everything. If you wanted, you could easily remove all these, but it's not necessary. So yep, let's get into the installation process and get your tunes running. Alright, so here we are at the machine. On the inside here, we're looking at the front. You want to remove this front plastic head panel here. To do that, you are going to be using a T30 Torx. You're going to want to remove these 2 bolts here. There are 2 bolts on the opposite side the same way. Then up underneath the mirror here, you're going to want to remove these 2 bolts. And then while holding this in place with one hand, you want to remove the 2 bolts up top. When you pull this away, you want to be careful if you do have the stock head unit like this one does, not to pull any of the wires out or do any damage. And then we'll move on the next step. Now that the mid plastic headliner panel is removed, we're going to move over to this dome light. We're going to use a 7/32 inch ratchet to remove 1 bolt on this side, 1 bolt on that side. Once you remove the bolts, this will kind of fall down like this. You can let it hang for right now. We are going to use the T20 Torx to remove, there's a bolt up underneath the top on that side. And if we back up here, there's going to be another one right here. We're going to remove both of those to get this front headliner down. Once you get the bolts removed, you can take the headliner, just kind of pull it out from underneath this bracket here. And then it'll come down same way on the other side. You can come up here. These 2 bullet connectors you can disconnect. These are for that dome light that's hanging, so that way you can pull that out of the way and you won't snag any of the wires or damage anything taking it out. Now that we have the front headliner and components removed, I'll move here to the back, do the same thing. There is a bolt here, a bolt on the opposite side the same way. Those are the T20s. There is a bolt back here in the corner. And on the same upper corner on the passenger side, those are also T20s to remove. And then up here in the center, these two bolts are T15s. Once you remove that, pull this headliner down in the same way that the front one came out. With the rear headliner removed, now we're going to go ahead and install the C-Works speaker mounts. These mounts right here with the hardware, they're going to mount on the stock tabs here on the roof. For any reason, these are designed to be the open back, so the speaker will just be open on the back side. If you wanted to cover that up at all, let us know. We can custom make you back covers for these depending on which speaker you're using. In our kit we can make the Kicker 6.5 rear covers, but we'll use the installation hardware that comes in the kit, and we will go ahead and bolt that up with the correct spacers in location. And I will go through the spacer info next. So in your kit here, there are going to be 3 1-inch spacers and one 1.5-inch spacer per speaker mount. So you're going to want to run that 1.5-inch spacer on this short post, and then on that post, this post, and this post here, we're going to run the 1-inch spacers. So the spacer will go in between this and the speaker mount to give it the right clearance to the headliner once it's reinstalled. So now if you have a Max machine, which this is a stage 6 kit, so it is for the Max machines, you will have these middle mounts. If you have a standard version, the installation of those rear mounts is going to be the same for the standard above the driver and passenger. But for the Max, to install those speaker mounts, we're going to remove this T20 and this T20. You can discard them, we're not going to use them. These little square plates here, you need to keep those. It's going to go, the spacer is going to go below this and then your mount. You can see back on the passenger side that I have installed how that is. And then the spacer configuration for this, I'm going to use the long one here, a 1.5 inch. Use a 1 inch here, 1 inch there, and then in this location here you're going to use the short 0.63 inch spacer. Right, so now we have all the speaker mounts in place. This is what you'll look like for reference. Those are the fronts, those are the rears. Now we'll get along to routing the speaker wires and the RGB LED wires for the speakers. So here we have our speaker wires. This is stage 6, so there's 2 different sets. You'll have your front and mids here, and then this is going to be your rears. Purple and green are the rears, white and the gray are the front and mids. They are labeled, you know, which way they're supposed to run, whether it's a mid right, mid left. Same thing for the fronts and the rears. I'm going to start by just kind of feeding the wire here, letting it kind of set up there, and then they're going to run along the stock wiring here. I'm going to run it up here. We're going to use some sticky tabs for mounting on zip ties. I'm going to run those back. The rears will run all the way back and then across. The mids will run down the center and then across to the speakers. Just hang the wires over the mount. And then the fronts, we'll just run around over here and we'll just kind of hook on the side brackets temporarily just to hold them in place. Alright, just to show for reference, our wires run up here, sticky tabs along the way, wires run down the center, one off for the mid right, your wire run down the center there, and splits off to each side for the rear speakers left and right. Next we're going to install the LED speaker wires. Those are going to run from the center here. We're actually going to come out to each side and then have them run along the outside of the roof. We're going to secure them the same way using those sticky tabs for the zip ties. You're going to run those to each speaker, labeled the same way. It'll be labeled mid, rear, and front, so you just correspond, run those in the correct locations. Right, now we're sitting in the cab here. We've got LED wires. It ran along the sides, back behind this mount, come up. Here's the one for the mid speaker. Come across all the way around to the rear. Same thing on the passenger side. So now at this point, we're going to mount our amplifier. The amplifier is going to mount right in this section here. But to do that, there are 3 bolts. One on the passenger side, one in the middle, one on the driver's side that hold the roof down to this metal part of the roll cage. We need to remove those 3 bolts. On the bottom side here is a T40 Torx, and the nut on the top side is a 13mm. Once we remove those 3, then we can lift this roof up a little bit, shove some wood blocks in there to hold it up to keep it out of the way, so that way we can get to our hardware when we're fastening the amp to the front section of the roll cage there. Alright, so now we got our wood blocks holding the roof up there. Kind of see they're just wedged in between. Just to hold it up out of our way a little bit. Next we have our amp. I unbolted the cables on the side just for ease of this video. You don't have to do that for this, but it's just that way it's a little bit easier to see what I'm doing here. So we're gonna kind of hold this up in place about like that, and we're gonna go ahead and mark those mounting holes on each side. Then we're gonna go ahead and drill the holes for our mounting screws and hardware. Once we have those drilled, we're gonna use a little touch-up paint, touch up the bare metal so that way it's kind of protected from rusting or anything like that. Let it dry for a little bit, and then we will go ahead and mount this amp into those holes. Then in my case, I'll put the plugs back on as well. There's the amp in place. A couple tips and tricks. I mean, it's doable by yourself, but if you have an extra set of hands, it's certainly not going to hurt to get those bolts in and hold the amp up at the same time. I just used a rubber band from one of the wiring kits here. I'll just cut off and slide out. I just kind of use that to hold the wiring back so that way it wasn't dangling in the way. And then just push your input wires through to that side, keep them out of the way there. From this point, we're going to move down to the battery and start running the main power wires for the amplifier. So first step, you want to access the battery, disconnect the terminals on the battery. It's always a good practice when you're doing anything electrical on your machine to do that. We are back rear passenger seat or the passenger seat on the standard models, non-max. I pull these 2 pins out. You're going to pull this cover out here. This one has a aftermarket Super ATV electrical box here. Requires me to use two hands to get this panel out of here. But what you want to do is there's a little like handle spot back here. Get your hand in there, kind of pop it out a little bit, and then you can kind of slide this whole thing over to the side and then wiggle it out. Now that you got the cover off, you can take the bolts off the two posts. I've already done that. Pull the wires off of the posts so that way there's no connection to them at all. Then we are going to mount our fuse first. That is going to mount up under here like this. Make sure that you're in the right location, that when you mount this in place, that your main wire here will still reach around from where you mount the fuse to this battery terminal. If you mount it too far over, you might run into problems where this wire will not reach. So try and keep it right in this location right here. That's for reference on once you get the fuse block mounted, how everything should look. I'm not going to put the cover on or anything yet, because the next step is going to be to run the main power and ground up underneath the black back liner here. So we are going to pull the seat off, just up top, pull out, set that off to the side, and then just going to want to basically fish your wire back behind this. Probably pop that screw out to help with that process. Looks like that's going to be a T20. Then once we get to there, push the wires down, kind of get them in location there, and we'll move on to the next step of routing the wires up along the cage there. Right, now we got power wire here, have enough reach. Ground wire here has enough reach. Those two are ran up under the back wall liner. Ran up along the inside here, all the way up. We went ahead and used the supplied wire loom to kind of cover up the wires in this location. There's no good way to run that large gauge wire that's required for the amp through the cage. So we use that to make running it easier past this section and in between the window. I actually removed the two glass, the middle slider and this slider, just to give you enough room to work this through there. And then this will run back behind this part of the cage and over the top. And then we're going to run it along the side of the frame all the way up towards the front. You can zip tie it right to the existing wires that you ran there already once before. And then once you get that up there, if you want, you can put zip ties around this to kind of hold it in place if needed. And then once we get that all installed, then we can go to running the wires to the amp itself. Then we got our amp wiring run up along the cage, up over the top of this cross member, along the side. It'll be up in between this bracket here. Then it'll run up along here. You're going to want to drill 2 holes big enough for the wires to fit through. Once you have them drilled, make sure you deburr them really good. Make sure there's no sharp edges or anything on them. Once you do that, then like the amp mounts, you're going to want to paint that bare metal, just cover it up, kind of protect it from rusting. Let it dry for a little bit, and then once you get that to that point, then run your wires through, and then you can connect your power and ground to these 2 terminals on your amp. Battery power, and then that's your ground. Our power and ground wires run through, connected to our plug. And the next step we're going to do is our front out and rear line out. The white and gray from our speaker wires going to connect to the front. Our green and purple from the rear speakers and go to the rear out. Those are just run up along underneath this bracket. Now that we've got that in, we're going to connect our subwoofer wires here, positive and negative, and those wires are going to run up along the same way, back around here, and then it's going to follow your LED wires around back to the side here for the maxes, where that slot is in between the cage. That's where we're going to run that down. For the standard model machines, it's just going to run back along the window, real similar to how the main power wires ran on the back window, just on the driver's side. All right, so our sub wire is run up over this cross member from the inside of the cage, comes down here. We're going to use that plastic wire loom, put it on the outside, and then kind of wedge it into this gap here to hold it in place. That way the wire doesn't come out. And then we're going to run the wires right down that hole. Where that comes out, come around here. That will end up coming out down here. And what we'll do, so we're going to remove these two bolts. Teeth already Torx, and then there are 3 push pins down on the bottom. And then this plastic piece will come out. This is where we're going to mount the subwoofer. If you don't have a subwoofer option, obviously you can leave this panel there, it doesn't matter, but we'll pull it out of there, make some more room for the sub. Alright, so now for the sub, you take it out of the box. It'll have some set of brackets and hardware. The hardware, you use the little plastic spacers here and the taper head screws. Install the 4 little spacers on there. And then what you want to do is take this bracket here. Going to want to install it with these set screws facing out that way, facing up. I'm just going to want to snap this into place. Once you get it snapped into place, like so, here, let's see if I can get it. Once it's in place, then you kind of slide the subwoofer in place right about there. It's going to bump up against these stops, and then what you want to do is you want to mark this edge right here, so that way when you pull all this out, pull the sub off the bracket, then you can put the bracket back where that line is and then mount it to the floor. So once you got everything marked, take the bracket off, put the bracket in place with your line, push it up against the back stops here. These little plastic things on the floor, just slide it, butt it up against that, and then you'll use the Phillips head screws that came with the kit, and you'll just screw it right through the frame, right into the floor. You want to make sure that these 2 threaded inserts are pointed out to the door side. It'll just make it easier to lock the sub in place later. So next thing we'll do is we'll put the sub in place, slide it into position, and then we will install the 2 bolts there to hold it in position. I put the sub down in there, lining up those little mounting tabs. One thing you want to make sure is that your wiring port is not on the front, that the wiring port is on the back side, because that's, your wires are eventually going to run back there. Don't run them up here though, they might get snagged on something on your foot when you're getting in or out. It's just better if that mounting port for the wires is on the back of the subwoofer. So once you got it in place, then you'll just slide it over to lock it in place, and then you'll use these 2 bolts, install it in there, and then that other threaded hole, and when you tighten them, it'll push the sub over and lock it into the base, mounting base itself. And you can feed your sub wire down, run it to your back terminal. The red wire goes to red, black wire goes to black. Once you've got that in place, then you can come back here. If you have any excess wire, you can just coil it up and zip tie it right back in that area. Keep it out of the way, keep it hidden. Alright, so now we can run our audio wires here next. This plug here that plugs into the head unit, there is the same as on the amp. It has the purple and green, white and gray. So off the amp over here, you have these rear in, sub in, and front in labels. The gray wire and white wires will plug into the front. Your rear in is going to be the purple and green. And then this set of wires here that has the RCA ends on it, this end here is going to plug into the one labeled sub in. And then all of these RCAs, and then this white plug will then plug into the back of the stereo when we go to mount that plastic panel back in place. The other thing that can be done at this point is your RGB speaker LED wires. You can hook these up to all the wires that you ran to the front. There's going to be 2 off to on their own for the stage 6 kit. These 2 are for the front wires. You don't necessarily have to hook those up now. We'll just run those wires when we go to put that panel in. And then these 4 here are the ones that will go to the rear speakers that we ran the wires up here for. Once we get that, then we will move on to mounting the antenna for the FM radio. And that's just going to be a drill through. Find a good location and we'll drill it through and get that done as well. Once you have everything plugged in, kind of tuck the wires up, keep them up out of the way, because when the radio mounts in, it's going to need some room back here for the body of the radio. The other thing is this blue wire coming off. That needs to be ran over to the remote, the REM on this plug. That's going to tell it when you turn the radio on. That wire is the signal wire to then have it turn the amp on. Once that's done, then you can come over here. You can hook up your power and ground to the terminal block. Power there, ground over here. You get the idea. That is keyed power on that terminal, so it's not going to be live with the key off at any time. You will need to have the key on to at least the ACC position to get power to your radio. Next step from there would be to also put your ring terminals on for your power cord that came with your Wet Sounds LED controller. That will also pull power from the same position, and that plug will just run right along with these ones and kind of hang here waiting to be plugged in when we put the panel up. At this point you can also remove your block of wood, bring your roof back down, reattach those 3 bolts securing the roof to the roll cage, and then we will move on to the front header panel. The antenna wire and the antenna mount is pretty simple. You're just going to feed this end that connects to the radio. Going to feed it up in here. Kind of figure out where up in here somewhere that you want to mount your antenna on the outside. Just make sure that wherever you mount it up on the top, that there's nothing. If you drill through the bottom, make sure that you have clearance on the top, enough clearance for this end to sit flush through the roof. And then once you get that hole drilled, we'll just put this in from the top side of the roof. This bolt will stick through the roof. You will put this end on there, attach it with the nut and washer, same way you took it apart, and that step will be completed. So over here on the header panel, this one had the stock radio. Pulled the stock radio out, pulled the stock speakers out of it. If you did have a stock radio in your machine, this cutout is going to be much larger than the cutout you need. We do make an adapter panel for it. Please let us know if you need one of those. Well, it's included in the kit if you need it. If not, it's not a big deal, but it's not sent with every kit. Otherwise, here you would drill you'd find your center point, take a hole saw, cut a 3-inch hole for the head unit to fit through. The back side of the housing will then go through there with all the wires. For the speakers, you can use the templates. These templates are in the box with the speakers. You put this template in there, mark around, drill the hole. Then once you've got that done, then you can feed the wires through the back, feed the wires through the hole, put your speaker in, and these front speakers will mount with the screws that come in the speaker boxes. So once we get all this installed, then we will go and plug it into the header panel. We have the wiring and everything ready to go for the header panel. We're going to go ahead and put the fabric headliners back in place, and then we are going to cut our holes in the headliner for our speakers. So those headliners are going to go in the same operation that they came out, just in opposite order, reattaching those screws in the same locations, and we'll be back. Alright, now with the headliner in, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of feel where the give is, where the hole is. So the plate, you can kind of feel where the plate is, and then it'll kind of have a spot where you can feel the hole. What you're going to do is you're going to take a box cutter, you're going to poke through, and then you're going to cut out to one edge, and then once you find that edge, then you can cut around the circle and cut out the circle in the headliner. It requires 2 hands, so I'm going to have to put the camera down. Once you have it cut out, it should look something similar to this. Kind of reach your speaker wires and everything right inside here. So that's a plus. And then you're going to do that to the other locations. Now we're going to go to installing the speakers. You're going to hook up your power, red to blue, black to black. You're also going to go ahead, connect your LED wires. On the speaker wires themselves, Kicker supplies a separator here, so each wire will go on each side. It's got a little divider wall, and there's a cap that goes over the top of that. There's 2 holes on the side here. You'll just zip tie this together, keeps the wires from touching. Once you get all that done, after all the connections are done as well, you just push that speaker with the wires up in there. Make sure none of the wires are pinched in between the speaker and the mount. Then you're going to go ahead and drill a pilot hole in each of the mounting holes in the speaker. If you don't drill the pilot holes, there's a chance you could damage the speaker mount up behind there. And then once you have your pilot hole drilled, then you can put in the screws that we supply. The screws that come with the kicker speakers themselves are not long enough, and you won't get good grip on the speaker mount. So use our longer supplied screws. And then when you're done, that's what it should look like. So we're gonna do that to 2 rears yet and finish up this other one, and then we can move on. With all the speakers installed on the roof of the machine, went ahead, installed our cover plate or adapter plate. It's 4 bolts, then a radio fits into that. It utilizes the metal mount, backing mount that comes with the PMX. Also popped out one of the switch covers, put in the RGB speaker LED controller, and I went ahead and removed the speakers after I had them test fit. This is going to be a little bit easier to hold this in place by myself when it's being installed back in the machine, which is the point that we are at. If you ever wanted to, before you mounted this, you could hook the radio up to the plugs and everything that are hanging in the machine, and you could turn on the speakers, make sure everything works before you put all this front plastic headliner in. It's kind of a per your preference. So I'm going to get this up in place, and once I get it up in place, then I will remount the 2 front speakers, plug them in. Alright, so we got our header panel back in. I went through, tested everything, made sure it worked. So at this point, we can go ahead and put our dome light back in. You can just pull this down back here. You can get to the wires to put those bullet connectors back together. Push that back up, and then we will put our setter panel back in, and then we're going to head down to the battery area to do the next step. Alright, so there is one thing you're going to have to trim. So right where these wires come down right here, you're actually going to figure out where those wires will hit the top of this cover. You just have to cut a notch for relief for those wires, otherwise this cover will not fit on flush. Once you have that, you can put the cover back on and your project is completed. If there is anything else that you guys have or needs, custom needs for any of these kits, you can go ahead and let us know. Be happy to help out.